Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to be with all of you and good to do what we're about to. We do it every Sunday. We begin by grabbing our Bibles and opening them. And this morning, join me in opening them to Exodus chapter 33, the 33rd chapter in the book of Exodus. And we have been in an ongoing series entitled "To Know Him is to Love Him." And last week we placed great emphasis on that word "know" in "to know Him is to love Him." How many know there are many people that know about God that do not know God? And the reason why the world is filled with people that know about God but do not know Him is that one Greek word, gnosko. It's the word translated many times know, known, or knowing. It speaks to experiential knowing. For example, 1 John 2, 3, and 4, by this we know that we have come to know Him if we keep His commandments. The one who says, I have come to know Him and does not obey His commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. How do we know if we know Him? We keep His commandments. Now, there's a lot of religious people who, listen, memorize them. There's a lot of religious people that can tell you which one is the sixth and which one is the eighth. There are a lot of religious people who might even be able to interpret the top 10 commandments. But listen, that's intellectual. Keeping them is experiential. Now, why do religious people who know about God keep the commandments and yet do not know Him? Why are they keeping the commandments? If they're keeping the commandments in order to go to heaven, they don't know Him. Because if you know Him, you know that we love because He first loved us. We love because He first loved us. The first commandment is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's the greatest commandment. But listen, if you're not obeying God from a place of love, then you have not experienced we love because He first loved us. This morning, I want to build upon experiential knowing. To know Him is to love Him when we add these two words to the word know. I want you to open up your ears. I'm going to read a few verses. Tell me if you could tell me what two words I came to talk about this morning that we want to add to the word know. Psalm 25 and 4, make me know your ways, O Lord. Psalm 103 and 7, He made known His ways to Moses. Psalm 95 and 10, and they do not know my ways. Isaiah 58 and 2, yet they seek me day by day and delight to know my ways. If you were listening carefully, you heard to know Him is to love Him when we know what? His ways. His ways. Do you know what words appear often simultaneous together in independent individual verses? My ways, His ways, and the word love. You see, when you know His ways, you're going to love Him for His ways. When you know His ways. We can't separate His ways from loving Him. And do you know why? Well, what do we mean by His ways? I'm always reluctant to reduce down or be overly simplistic on anything that is complex. But since I'm beginning this new series within a series on to know him is to love him when you know his ways, let's reduce it down. Ezekiel 18, twice in Ezekiel 18 are these exact words. Yet you say, the way of the Lord is not right. Hear now, O house of Israel, my way, is my way not right? Is it not your ways that are not right? To know his ways is to know, listen, God is always right. He's always right. Don't you love people who are always right? No, you don't, because you don't know any. Anyone know any know-it-alls? They think they know it all. They think they're right. Proverbs 14:12 says, there is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. The person who knows God's way, now get this, you know what? You know how you can tell somebody who knows God's ways? They are willing to let God be God in their lives. They are willing to let God be God in their lives. And do you know why? His ways are always right. Have you ever thought to yourself, this ain't right? Have you ever complained about something you were going through? Have you ever said, you know, I just don't like this. I don't agree with this. Did it ever occur to you that you're going through what you're going through because it is precisely his ways, and his ways are always right? Now, the Christian who knows his ways knows his ways are right when life is good and when life is not so good. How many know God doesn't like complainers, grumblers? Israel was complaining and grumbling. Did it ever occur to us that when we're complaining or grumbling about what we're going through, that maybe, just maybe, it's God's way? And his ways are always what? Right. Are his ways right when I am healthy? Well, that's when we like to say his ways are right. But how about when I am sick? Are his ways still right? Does he know enough to know when I'm sick? Does he know enough to know when I am healthy? Does he have anything to do with either? Can either be said to be his ways? There are only two levels of knowing God in the Bible. You either know his works or you know his ways. The Israelites were really good at knowing his works, but they did not know his ways. They knew his works when he came out of Egypt. When they came out of Egypt, the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Those were all the works of God. They know God by his works. They just did not know his ways. And with that introduction into a several-week series, I'd like to direct your attention to Exodus 33, verses 12 and 13. Exodus 33, verses 12 and 13. Then Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you yourself have not let me, what? Know whom you will send with me. Moreover, you have said, I have known you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. So Moses wants to talk about knowing. Now look at verse 13. Let's see what he wants to know. Now, therefore, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know what? Say it out loud.
Your ways.
Your ways, that I may know you, so that I might find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. Listen, you will never know God unless you know his ways. To know him is to love him. But remember, we're talking about experiential knowing. But we're not talking about intellectual knowing. What are his ways that are always right? His way of mercy is always right. His way of grace is always right. His way of love and kindness and forgiveness is always right. How about his ways of discipline? How about his ways of judgment? How about his ways of anger? Are they also right? God is being God in our lives either way. Either way. You know, just in case you did not know, Exodus 33 is the aftermath of the golden calf. Exodus 32, 8 and 9, they have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and have worshipped it and have sacrificed to it and said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." The Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people, and behold, they are an obstinate people." Now, with those verses placed in your ears, now look at Exodus 33, 2 and 3. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite and the Amorite and the Hittite and the Perizzite, the Hivite and the Jebusite. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst because you are a what? See, this is the aftermath of the golden calf. And what does it then say? And I might destroy you on the way. See, it's his way to sometimes destroy you on the way. He promises to send his angel with them to take them to the promised land, but God says that he himself won't go up with them so that he doesn't destroy them on the way because of their stiff necks. What are his ways? Mercy, grace, love, kindness, forgiveness, discipline, judgment, and anger. When God administers his way of mercy over here, and God administers his way of anger over here, some people like to say God changes his mind. No. God is being God either way. Either way. Notice verses 15 through 17. Then he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. For how then can it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not by your going with us so that we, I and your people, may be distinguished from all other people who are upon the face of the earth? Now let's stop there. God already told Moses in verses 2 and 3, I'm going to send an angel. Or back in the other verse that we read, he's going to send an angel. Now we read on. The Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. I will also do this thing. What thing of which I have spoken? What thing will now God do? Is it not by your going with us? Did you read that? Mm-hmm. I will also do this thing. But what does it say before that? Is it not by your going with us? So first he tells Moses, I'm not going to go with you. I'm going to send an angel ahead of you. Now he tells him, I'm going to what? I'm going to go with you. God went with them. Do you know what I call this? To know him is to love him when you know his way of mercy. Mm-hmm. Right? When God said, I'm not going to go with you. I might destroy you if I go with you. Why is he saying I might destroy you if I go with you to the promised land? Because if you read about the prior golden calf episode, many of the Jewish people were destroyed for doing that. So now the aftermath of that is where we are in Exodus 33. We're now heading to the promised land. And God is saying, I'm not going to go with you because if I go with you, I might destroy you. Well, they already have evidence that he did that. I would argue the Jewish people experienced his ways, but now get this, only Moses knew his ways. Verse 13. Now, therefore, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, that I may know you. What do we call that? Now, therefore, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways. What's Moses doing? He's praying. The Jewish people never prayed to know his ways. You know what the Jewish people always wanted? More works. More works. I want to know more works. Moses prayed for God's ways. Look at verse 15 again. Then he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. Moses was willing to give up entering the promised land if it meant that God would not be with him and the people. You know what this tells me about Moses? He understands his ways. He knows his ways. There's a principle here. What's the principle? Well, I hope we all get this one. The desert with God is better than the promised land without him. The desert with God is better for us than the promised land without God. You see, you and I can be in a bad place. Let's call it the desert. That's where the Jewish people are. You can be in a desert right now. You want to make sure you're like Moses and not like the Jewish people. If you're in a bad place right now in life, you're in a desert of your own, you want to begin where Moses began and pray, Lord, I want to know your ways. But what do we normally do when we find ourselves in a bad place? Lord, I want to know your works. In other words, we want God to get to work some way, somehow, and undo this mess I'm in, this whatever is bothering me. Whatever has me down, depressed, discouraged. God, we got to intervene here. I need for you to do something. Let me suggest that whatever bad place we find ourselves in, better to be in it with God than to be out of it without God. Do we know that way? What way? Little is more when we have the presence of God in our lives. Psalm 37:16, better is the little of the righteous than the abundance of many wicked. Why was God angry with Israel? Why? Well, listen to Hebrews. Hebrews 3:9-11 will tell you why God was angry. Here's what it says. For your fathers tried me by testing me and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore, I was angry with this generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my wrath, they will not enter my rest. God was angry with Israel because all they wanted was more works, not more ways. Listen to what David wrote in Psalm 103:7 concerning Exodus 33. He made known his ways unto Moses, his acts unto the children of Israel. You know why he made his ways known to Moses and not the people? Moses prayed. Moses prayed, I want to know your ways that I might know you. What did the Jewish people pray for? More works. You know, the difference between knowing God's works and knowing God's ways is the difference between rest and relapse, peace and panic when things are not going well. Find the word rest at the end of verse 14. How many want rest? Do you know what we want when life is just not good? Peace and rest. How are we usually when life is not good? We panic and we have unrest. What do we need in order to have rest when in the desert? His presence. You know, there's just something about a little child who's afraid in their bedroom and they're crying for their daddy. And then their daddy comes into the bedroom, and all of a sudden there's no boogeyman anymore. What happens to a lot of little girls when daddy says, okay, Nicole, it's time to go back to bed, and he wants to leave the bedroom? They panic again because they find their peace in their father being in their presence. To get more of God in your life, the more of God in our lives is what we need. Now, for this to have meaning and not simply be lofty thinking or some platitude, like you're only as old as you feel, that's a platitude. Does that help? No, you're only as old as you feel. You're not feeling good, but you're only as old as you feel. And we throw those platitudes out like they're really going to help someone. For this to sink deeply into our hearts, we must know you cannot trust someone you do not know. You can't. And you can't fully know them if all you see is their works and not their ways. You have to know their ways in order to love them. You have to love them in order to trust them. And when you love someone, you trust that someone. And you must trust them to obey them. I just gave you the progression of living in the light of knowing his ways. My wife, Lori, and I have known each other for 33 years. When we first met in the early stages of our dating, you know what we knew about each other? Only our works. Well, we only knew what we did for each other. Oh, Michael took me here. Michael bought me that. You should know what Lori did. You know what Lori did? She worked at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare at that time, and there used to be a big sign off the Kennedy Expressway, and it was my birthday, and she was, I think, in Mexico on vacation with her girlfriends, and she said, I want you to go see the sign at the Hyatt. And here's this big sign at the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, digital. Happy birthday, Michael. And I pulled on the shoulder and I just stared at it for as long as I could. But you see, that takes us back to a time when we only knew each other by what we did. But as our relationship grew, we began to know each other's ways. Don't miss that. Miss what? To know him is to love him when we know his ways, and his ways take time to know. The sooner and the more quickly we get on the road of relationship and intimacy, the better off we're going to be when we find ourselves in the desert. Now that Lori and I have been together for many years, she knows my ways intimately and I know hers, and I trust her completely. Lori can ask me to do something, and without hesitation, I will not even question or want to know the details. I will just do it. You know why? Because I know her ways. I know that she would never do anything to hurt me. She would never do anything to harm our family. We all make mistakes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking, I have enough confidence and trust in our relationship after 33 years that I know if she said to me, I want to do such and such, I would believe her. Moses knew the ways of God because he had that intimate relationship. Look at verse 11. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a what? A friend. Do you look at God as your friend? You know, friends, when they get to know each other, they know each other's ways. God describes Moses as a friend. How did he describe Israel in verse 1? Look at verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up from the land of Egypt. Notice God doesn't say the people I brought up, but the people you brought up. You know what that's telling me? There's no relationship between God and the Jewish people. The relationship is only with Moses, the one who says and prays to him, I want to know your ways. Why was Moses the only one out of the nation to experience close fellowship with the Lord? Because he was the only one that wanted to know his ways. The rest of the nation, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, were interested only in God meeting their needs and wanted no relationship. They merely wanted what he can give them. You know what the Jewish people were known for coming out of Egypt? Complaining, murmuring, pulling away from God's presence instead of drawing near. Have you ever heard of this, a victim mentality? There's a lot today that is being spoken of about being against the idea of a victim mentality. In other words, everything that is going wrong in your life is the result of what somebody else did to you. You're a victim. That was the Jewish people. That was the Jewish people. They had a victim mentality. And so they would always be belly aching and crying out to God over what he didn't do and what he needs to do. No matter what they received, they always wanted more, something better. They were never satisfied. They wanted to know more works. God wanted them to know more ways. The difference between knowing God's works and knowing God's ways is the difference between peace and panic. Who's the only person who did not panic at the Red Sea? Moses. Everybody else panicked. And you know why? Because the only thing they could see was what was happening. What were the people looking for at the Red Sea? More works. But past works don't give rest. You know what past works do? They only create a desire for present works. Knowing God's ways is trusting in the present because of the past. Can I say that again? Knowing God's presence or knowing God's ways is trusting in the present because of the past. If all you see are the works of God, then when the works of God don't come as you think they should come, you push the panic button. And the reason? How many know this? Isaiah 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways or my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. What if God's ways are not like our ways? What if it is God's way? Listen, what if it's God's way that we suffer? Now get this, and we did nothing wrong. And we did nothing wrong. Are you willing to let God be God? Are you willing to trust in his ways? Are you willing to trust that he knows something that we don't know? We should never make the mistake of thinking God's ways are like our ways or God's thoughts are like our thoughts. Our thoughts are never going to reveal God's ways. You know why? His ways are mysterious. Listen to what I mean by that. Psalm 77 and 19. The way is in the sea, and the path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. So let's put that together. Here's what the psalmist is saying. Thy way is in the sea. So God's in the water. How many know God can walk on water? But did you hear? And thy footsteps are not known. In other words, you can't see them. So here's God walking on water, and you can't see his footsteps. Sometimes you can't see God's ways. Sometimes you just can't see him. You know what we ought to be grateful for? He knows his ways. And his ways are what? They're always what? Right. How will we know God's ways? Not by seeing the Red Sea parted. Not by observation, not by looking around. His ways are above our ways, not by reasoning. Moses learned the ways of God through intimate, face-to-face relationship as a friend. Just knowing he's there. Just knowing he's there. Don't miss that. Presence. His presence would go before them. Peace and rest comes just knowing he's there. But you know what that's going to take? Trust, confidence. But you can't have trust and confidence in someone that you don't have a love relationship with that has been nurtured over time. It takes time to get to the place of Moses. You see, if we only see God outwardly as miraculous works, we will live with worry. Why will we live with worry when our focus is on his works and not his ways? Why? When will he work? What if I'm waiting a long time for him to work? I hope you just heard a principle. What if I'm waiting a long time for him to work? Did it ever occur to us that might just be his way? I mean, 400 years in Egypt is a long time to learn his ways. We often disappoint ourselves when he doesn't act like we think he should. But we do that to ourselves. How is not knowing God's way a recipe for relapse? Well, when a drug addict has a relapse, what do we mean? They revert to their old ways, right? Believers have relapses all the time. Do you know what they do? They revert to the life they used to live before they were born again. I've seen it many times. Their ways change. All of a sudden, they don't go to church anymore. All of a sudden, they're not involved in the things of God like they used to. Why? Because they're in the desert of life, and the only thing they can be preoccupied with is his works, not his ways, not knowing that maybe they are where they are because he put them there. How many know this passage? Matthew 13, 20 through 22. The one on whom seed was sown on the rocky places, this is the man who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no firm root in himself, but is only temporary. And when affliction or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he falls away. And the one on whom seed was sown among the thorns, this is the man who hears the word, and the worry of the world and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. You see what's happening here? Somebody hears the gospel, right? And they received it with joy. Great. And now all of a sudden life stinks. They're in the desert of life. And do you know what they don't know? Listen to Romans 5. And not only this, but we also exalt in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance, and perseverance, proven character, and proven character, hope, and hope never disappoints. Because what? Listen, the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who is given to us. Did you hear what I just heard? God's love gives us tribulations. God's love gives us tribulations. You say, why would he do that? Well, that's the first mistake you make when you say, why would God do that? Do you know what you're saying when you say, why would God do that? He's not as right as Pastor Campo says he is. If he was as right as Pastor Campo says he is, you would never ask the question, why? Because you would believe that if I'm going through tribulations, this must be his way. His what way? His love way. He's pouring out his love into my heart, and he's sending me tribulation. Why? Knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance. What did I say about some believers? They have relapse. But listen, relapse is not always indicative of return. Relapse sometimes is the beginning of apostasy. Relapse does not necessarily mean you're not saved. But listen, everybody that is an apostate begins with relapse. They heard the gospel, they believe the gospel, they're going to church, they're part of the Christian community. And now all of a sudden you don't see them anymore. They're not involved anymore. And so you think, well, they're just going through a difficult time. Okay. But now all of a sudden that difficult time is turned into 1 year and 2 years and 3 years. Or there are these kind of Christians. All of a sudden, whatever was bad, it's not bad anymore. And now they come back. And then something new happens, and something bad. And they go through this vicious cycle of every time life stinks, they have a relapse. Did it ever occur to us that when we are going through difficulties, it's God's way of authenticating the genuineness of our faith? The only ones who are saved, according to Jesus, are those who persevere to the end, who endure to the end, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance. Did you know that it is God's love for us that brings to us tribulation? You say, that does not sound loving to me. Oh, your ways are getting in the way. I thought you agreed with Isaiah 55. His ways are not my ways. His ways are higher than my ways. I'm not going to dare inflict upon him my ways of thinking. Unless, of course, you became God. And now all of a sudden, you're always right. James 1:2-5, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing. Do you get the idea here that the Bible wants us to know things? Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. The testing of your faith. You know, we're going to learn in this series something about God, knowing God's ways. God sometimes sends suffering to people who have done nothing but right. Don't always assume that suffering is linked to, oh, they must have really screwed up big time. Not necessarily. Where was Paul screwing up big time? Who suffered more than him next to Jesus Christ? But if any of you lacks wisdom, now this is all said in the context of consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. But if any of you lacks wisdom, how many times have I heard pastors say, you lack wisdom on whether you should take that job? You lack wisdom whether you should marry that woman? You lack wisdom whether you should sell that house or buy that house. You lack wisdom on whether you should move. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God. Bad hermeneutics. That's a classic example of taking a phrase out of context. Who lacks wisdom? In James 1:2-5, who lacks wisdom? Well, they're going through trials. And they don't have enough wisdom to understand that they're going through trials in order to test their faith. Do you have that wisdom? Because if you lack that wisdom, ask God. He's going to give you that wisdom. He's going to want you to understand that you're going through what you're going through, and this is just my way. This is just my way. Are we wise to his ways? Let's end on an evangelistic note. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am what? The way and the truth and the life, and no one can come to the Father but through me. The only way to the Father is through the Son. There's no other way. Do we know that only way? This past Thursday in the pool, I was witnessing to a man who had told me that he's twice been on this show, The Ninja Warriors or something like that. I guess there's obstacle courses and and when you look at this guy, I mean, I don't doubt that wasn't on it twice. And he says to me, they're adding water to this show, and I want to try to get on it for the third time. So I just started swimming, he said, a month ago. So he's in the lane next to me, and I said, yeah, I swim because of my legs. He says, oh, you got problems with your legs? I said, yeah. He says, I'll pray for you. And I said, oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, who are you going to pray to? And he says, well, I believe in God, and, I'm not big on religions. I think there's all kinds of ways, he said, to God. And I says, where's Jesus in this? And he says, oh, I believe in Jesus. I says, well, do you know that Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life, and no man can come to the Father but through me. I had to tell him there's no other way. But he's like a lot of young people today. They have a pluralistic, ecumenical idea that there's a lot of ways to God. Do you know what Jesus said immediately after that? If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen me. Gnosko. The only people who know him are people who know he is the only way. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for your word. Lord, please, may it do a work in us who believe, as your servant Paul told the Thessalonians. May it not just be a word, but may it be a word that works. May it be a word that encourages us, that the next time we find ourselves in the desert of life, that we so much like Moses want to pray, I want to know your ways that I may know you. Lord, help us to remember not to race to you and say, Lord, I want to know your works. Please do something about this. Do something about that. May we not be like the Israelites. May we be like Moses. Amen.
Amen.